we'll talk about adjunctive techniques. This time, we're not going to be having a case discussion just because this is quite a bit of a long talk. And I think it's important for us as we're phasing things. We're using new stuff, we're phasing things out. We need to understand why we're not using what we're not using, because we're going to be moving on to other trusts. We're going to be asking good and wonderful stuff. Okay. Now that we understand physiology, we always ask about, okay, how is the baby? What's the baby up to? What's the baby doing? Yeah, that's how we're thinking. That's our thought process. If you keep on thinking like that, there is very little that you would actually need any extra tests. Okay. However, there always comes a situation, or sometimes comes to a point, that we might need a little bit more. Okay, I am not entirely certain. I don't know what this baby is up to. What is this baby doing? Okay, and research from the past, CTG, since they started, is always showing that there's an increased risk or increased chance of having a severe infection. 63% increase. That is a significant increase from somebody who's well. Okay, well, let's hope at least we're making a difference. No? And we're using more instrumentals. But no, we're not making a difference. HIVs are the same, CTGs are the same, neonatal deaths are the same. Yeah, that's not good. This research, though, is from the era before physiology, with pattern recognition. Okay. Research that we're showing are data from our hospital here, from other hospitals that I've worked in, from other trusts that I've started this. Incidents are improving, and there is a significant improvement in outcomes. Okay. Not everybody has shown a reduction in intervention rate, okay, like us. We haven't reduced our intervention rate, but at least our outcomes are getting better. At least now we can justify where we're doing more interventions.
Does that make sense? Less section?
It depends upon the team. So, I mean, this is the second set of nights where we actually maintain 0 cesarean sections on the nights, 0 cases in theater over the nights, okay? And we intervene less and less. But that's, I mean, I'm still looking for the person who's trying to balance my workouts.
Actually, I didn't do a single cesarean in the weekend apart from the elective.
See, well done.
Wasn't me, you know, there you go.
So what we're trying to think of when we're getting an adjunctive test is something to improve the interpretation so that we intervene when we need to and specify the interpretation so that we don't intervene if we really don't have to. Okay? Okay. We're talking about CTGs at the moment. Well, our understanding of physiology makes our life much easier, much better. We can see, if you understand what the physiological changes are and you follow the patterns and follow the actual changes, you can figure out what the baby is up to without needing to do any extra tests. And to support us, wherever you're going now, so the FIGO guidelines, okay, stable baseline, maintaining variability, incidence of acidosis is low, okay? Similarly, NICE guidelines now actually also say the same. So wherever you go, the guidelines are still the same. You have a stable baseline, you have maintained variability, the incidence of acidosis is low. Okay, does that mean that I'm happy with seeing a rise in a baby that's now stressed and has a catecholamine rise, and I'll just enjoy the view and carry on? No. So prevention is always better than cure. You can still say, even if the baseline has gone up, the baby is not acidotic if the variability is maintained. Okay? Variability is maintained means that baby's brain is still there and baby's still compensating for whatever's happening. Once the baby starts going to proper anaerobic metabolism and starts going into ischemia in the brain, that's when acidosis significantly starts. Having said all of that as well, if you end up with a high baseline for a long time, you will usually end up with a low pH, even though your baby is going to pick up really well. When we started doing physiology, I actually emailed Edwin a couple of times asking him about, okay, what's this thing about pHs? Because I have a perfectly normal baby. Had I not done the gas, I literally was ignoring the gases, but we had a rule at the time where everybody's doing gases. And we started getting normal babies, normal UPGARs with pH of 6.8. Okay, perfectly fine. They observed them throughout 24 hours and they're perfectly fine. There's no evidence of anything. But it's just that they have been hypoxic, or not hypoxic, or peripheral hypoxia has been going on for a while. Remember, when baby's compensating, when the baseline has gone up, baby's redistributing, which means it's taking all the blood from the periphery, from its hands, from its legs, from its muscles, from its gut, going to the heart and the brain. If virility is still maintained, that means the baby's brain is still well oxygenated. That doesn't mean that its arms and legs are still well oxygenated. Even though they're not doing as much, they're still putting some acid into the system. Okay? It doesn't mean that baby is hypoxic. It doesn't mean that baby's getting damaged. Just don't leave it with nothing. Well, does that make sense? Okay. So when we talk about adjunctive techniques, most textbooks have 4. One, which they always list to really few, which is pulse oximetry. Okay, and that's so I've not even put that on. Okay, the 3 that are fetal pulse oximetry. Basically, put a pulse oximeter similar, but on baby's ear or stick it to baby's scalp, and they assess oxygen saturation in the baby throat. Never been proven to be, never been proven to be of any value whatsoever. Okay, ignore that. The things that still exist in our world in 2020, apart from COVID, so fetal scalp stimulation, okay, STAN, or combined CTG and ST analysis, and unfortunately, fetal blood sampling. So we're just gonna briefly run across all 3, focusing on fetal scalp stimulation and STAN. Okay, what's fetal scalp stimulation? Tickling the baby's head. So whatever test we use, we have to think about several things. Okay? What are we testing for? Or what are we doing? What am I expected to find from this test? And why am I doing it? Okay. So the idea is, from tickling the baby's head, is to try and stimulate the baby's brain, stimulate the response from the baby. What part of the brain am I stimulating? There are 2 parts of the brain, somatic and autonomic. Somatic. Okay. Why would I bother by stimulating the somatic?
If the baby's responding,
that means its brain is still functioning. Yeah. So when would that be helped? Or how would I do it to start with? Okay. So you can do that by digital stimulation. You can put an FSC. So when it was actually originally described, it was by taking forceps and pinching the baby's head. When it's mentioned, when it was mentioned in the national guideline, it actually said, well, if you just cut the baby, doing an FPS and you've seen an acceleration or you've seen a response, that's fine. The baby's actually okay. So you've cut the baby to get it stimulated. Okay. Is there any other way that you can stimulate the baby without, other than using a barbaric forceps or tickling its head? What if she's not fully dilated? She's cervix closed. You can do that. Okay. Potentially. Anything else you can think of? So vibroacoustic stimulation, yes. When they tested it, they used the electronic larynx. Okay, so in the research, they use the electronic larynx. Have you ever seen it? It's the machine that vibrates. So people who have had the larynx removed, they literally have a vibrator that they put on there, and then they can move the tongue and they can still speak. So they took that and put it on the mom's abdomen, and the baby started moving. Similarly, the ultrasound machine, so if you're scanning a baby, it creates the ultrasound wave going through the fat, creates a lot of noise. Okay? If you're one of the unlucky people who can actually hear it, like myself, it is really, really, really annoying. And you can't sit in that. You can hear the ultrasound passing through mom's fat. It creates that high-pitched noise that is really annoying. It actually could stop me. That's why I don't like being in a scanning room for a long time. Yes. I scan for sure. I can't do a scanning clinic. It would drive me crazy. I always go back to anyway, so baby's being stimulated. So if you do a scan, baby usually starts moving. frequently what happens, moms come in saying, well, baby has not been moving over last night. Put the baby on the monitor and it started moving straight away. They always do. Is that because they're lying? Because the baby is just not hearing those with the CTG. Remember, the Doppler is an ultrasound wave going in and then going back out. It's not feeling the compression, it's feeling the noise. So it actually is hearing that noise. Yes.
No. When all the CTG, you can hear another noise.
I love an epilepsy. But the CTG is not as bad. It's not as bad as the scanning machine. The scanning machine is much stronger. I can hear it much more. But that's why they wake up when you put them on a monitor. And if they're not moving and you start scanning and the baby is still not moving, that's a bad sign. Yes. The ultrasound wave gets, I don't hear the ultrasound waves. I hear them passing through the mom's fat tissue. They create a certain noise. Anyway, of course I can. Digital stimulation, please. Yeah, that is your first call. And if the cervix is not dilated, please use a scanner.
I don't just stimulate like
nail and just the normal digital stimulation. Yeah, not who's there.
You got him.
Two, man. Okay, so when would we need fetal scan stimulation? What's the situation that I would need to use this test? So this is this now.
Sometimes when they're a bit, you think they're not, are they cycling?
Okay, so describe the CTG for that.
It's like a normal baseline.
So the normal baseline that ability is reduced. What does reduce mean? For how long? Less than 5. Why 40? If baby can have a sleep cycle of 50, why 40? Why are you cutting the baby cycle short? If you're reaching, yeah, so if you're more than 50 minutes and the baseline remains the same, has remained the same, and that is a very important thing. Because if the baseline is already raised, babies do not sleep with adrenaline. Okay? If the virility is reduced with a high baseline, this is either hypoxia or chorioamnitis. Okay? Both of which you're not just going to mess with fetal scan stimulation. You are going to do a proper intervention. But if the baseline has remained the same, virility is now reduced, that is when you need to actually try and stimulate the baby's brain. Okay. Now, another important, very, very, very important situation is if the lady is on a lot of levetidol. Okay. Now, if the lady is on high dose levetidol is an alpha and beta blocker. It blocks the entire sympathetic system. If your baby is going through episodes of deceleration, it's decelerating, it can still decelerate, it can still do that. The only thing the baby can't do is redistribute. The baby cannot redistribute. So that protective part of the mechanism is gone. And the other thing is that the baby cannot raise its baseline. So if they're on high dose levetidol, you're seeing lots of deceleration. And suddenly the virility goes off. Okay, I wouldn't wait for the 50 minutes. I would try and figure out, is this baby just falling asleep?
What's the high dose?
High dose depends upon the mum. So it depends upon, it's variable for every single person. Okay, so for mum, you'll notice her heart rate has gone down. So she has a heart rate of 50, 60, something like that. Baby usually has a heart rate of about 100, 110, 120. So it's usually on the lower, but that's normal. That is normal. Okay. Variability is generally not the best because you've blocked off the entire system. Babies can be the same. So if you know that a lady is on levetidol, forget the high dose. Okay. You've seen a lot of decelerations, and then the variability has gone off. Okay. It can mean that the baby is now decompensating because it's that it can't, because its heart rate can't go up. It can be that it's gone to sleep. So how do I figure that out? I have a system that is untouched, that's somatic. I can stimulate that. Doesn't mean that I need to go and do repeated VEs on this lady. I can just use the scanner. Stimulate the baby, see whether if it's moving, good. If it's not moving and it doesn't want to respond, if you read it with a scanner, then do a digital stimulation. It still doesn't want to respond, something's wrong. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So, what is your anticipated response? What do you expect to see on the trace? An acceleration. Yes? So, and it's usually short-lived. And if the baby is sleeping, you do it a couple of times, baby usually wakes up a bit more. Okay? Not just a brief squiggly. Because frequently, doing a V causes a squiggly on the trace. Yeah? And then it's flat, squiggly, because it just ends flat again. That's not the response you're asking for. You want an acceleration, and then baby wakes up. You may need to do it a couple of times, but you need to get that response. So, if the baby has responded, the risk of hypoxia is less than 2.5%. Okay. If the baby hasn't responded, especially if this baby, the reduced variability is persistent, baby is hypoxic in more than 38% of situations. So over a third of those babies are hypoxic. Yeah? They said, especially if there's persistent reduced variability. Does that make sense? I think it's a good test. It has its place. It's not just to go and simulate everyone and expect that they're always gonna wake up. Okay? You don't go and do it for somebody who has a prolonged deceleration and you do it expecting that that's gonna cure the acute hypoxia. That's not gonna do that. It has its place. Anything that's used outside of its place is obviously gonna be misinterpreted and it's gonna end up with the wrong result. Does that make sense? Any questions about this last simulation? Shall we move on to Stan?
Yes.
Yeah. So, Stan is combined CTG and fetal ECG at the same time. Takes both into account and you have to interpret both together. You can't interpret one of them without the other. Okay? So, the concept behind is that when baby is exposed to hypoxia, if the baby is exposed to hypoxia, it is going to start doing anaerobic metabolism to supply its energy. Yeah? And anaerobic metabolism is not as efficient as normal metabolism or aerobic metabolism, which means that you are going to utilize or burn out more glucose. Hence, you're going to have to get more glucose from the glycogen stores. Yeah? So normally, normal metabolism or aerobic metabolism metabolizes glucose down to carbon dioxide and water. And that gives us how many ATPs? Aerobic metabolism. 38. Okay. But anaerobic metabolism, glucose breaks down just to lactic acid. It doesn't go all the way to carbon dioxide and water. And that releases how many ATPs? 2.
You say
Okay. Just if you say all the numbers, we'll pick one, we'll be fine. I mean, I just said it's inefficient. It has to be less than 38, yes? Okay, so now in normal circumstances, most of our energy is being utilized by something called the sodium-potassium pump. 60% is utilized by the sodium-potassium pump. What does the sodium-potassium pump do? It pumps sodium outside and potassium inside of the cell. Okay. Now, let us assume that we have a molecule of glucose that gives us 38 ATPs, and that's how much we need to work with sodium-potassium pump. Okay. So, if we're using anaerobic metabolism, the same glucose is only going to give us 2. But the sodium-potassium pump requires 38. So basically, to get the 38, this is what we need. Yeah? Your body doesn't have that amount of storage, or that amount of glucose just running around. So you need to break down the glycogen to produce glucose. And the problem with that is that that produces more potassium, which increases the workload of the sodium-potassium pump. So it's not as efficient as aerobic, and it actually may add to the workload, may make things slightly worse. Now, our friends, the cardiologists and medics, they tell me, because I don't know, when ECGs So normal ECG wave, when we have more potassium, what does that look like? So higher T waves. Yeah? Okay. So if we are going to combine that, let's try and utilize that principle. For us to measure the baby's ECG, we need to put a electrode in the baby's scalp. Okay? And we have to have a skin electrode on mom's thigh. Why? What do you mean by counteract? Yes, because mom's electrical activity is transmitted to the baby as well. Mom's electrical activity is actually, so it's goes to her entire body and baby's within her body. But what the machine does, it picks up mom's electrical activity, picks up the whole activity picked up from the FSC, then subtracts that. So if you don't have a proper skin electrode, you don't have a proper monitoring, even if the machine is telling you it's picking up, because then it's not accurate. You are going to pick up some of moms, some of babies, whichever is stronger, the machine is going to pick up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, just got a question.
Yeah.
How is it that you can get the ECG with just one electrode when in adults you with their feeding?
So how does the 3-lead ECG work?
It measures like the.
It measures one electrode against the Earth's other side. So it combines the other two and makes it as a, this is your baseline, it measures just one electrode. And then it changes one electrode, am I correct?
No,
So the 3-lead one is only
The only medic in the room can't do that. I can speak freely. Okay, I'm glad, so glad you Yes.
So it's something to do with the 3-lead is only actually.
The 3-lead is only measuring one. I mean, electrical inputs, you have to measure 1 to 1. Okay, it's basically a one circuit. Okay, one is the Earth, one is your Earth. The Earth is whatever one side, or the two other electrodes, and the third one is the one that is active. So this active lead is baby's scalp.
What's
The rest of mom and baby together.
Could you get the standard
You can try. I'm happy to drill
What
one
would
into
you
and see
find
what.
out yourself to yourself?
What?
Yeah, we can tell you.
Like we could stand clip you and then add you to me. Yeah. But if you add yourself.
If you just earth to one side and you sign clip the other side, you'll get an ECG signal. It's just like, yeah. It's just like your ECG. It's exactly like your ECG. Thank you. Right. Let's crack on. What you end up with is, once again, a CTG. Okay, so fetal heart rate, it usually changes color, and it shows the uterine activity, normal CTG. And then once it goes in, the scan machine does not have a standard. Okay, so the only standard within the scan machine is that T wave has to be pointing upwards. Okay, and that P wave should be showing, and it looks for the QRSs to count the fetal heart rate. These are the only standards. How big, what does it look like? It has no idea. What it does for the first 4 minutes, once you put that clip on, for the first 4 minutes, it's determining, it's assuming that the baby is completely normal and determining what the normal ECG for this specific baby looks like. Okay? So those 4 minutes, this CTG has to be completely normal. This baby has to be in a non-hypoxic state.
So no deceleration.
Well, hypoxia, not hypoxemia. Deceleration is
So if
hypoxemia.
someone's going stable base on the normal range.
Yes. And we're talking stable, so you don't have a catecholamine surge. You don't have, yeah, you don't have prolonged
For 4
deceleration.
minutes.
For the first 4 minutes at least. No, that is not long. You also have to make sure that this baby is not being stimulated with other stuff. So it's not being pushed and squeezed through the birth canal and then assuming that this is its normal state. Yeah? Okay. Now, once it's determined the baseline, it tells you that it has. And then every 30 beats, it performs a check against the original shape. and says, okay, yeah, you're fine. Cross. Or it can tell you certain things like draw some numbers down there. Okay? And I'll explain what those numbers are in a moment. Does it make sense so far? Now, as we were just saying, remember, mom's ECG signal can be transmitted through baby. Is that a problem? Yes, because I have seen FSCs working and they're sleeping normally, okay, with an intrauterine fetal death many times. Many times. You put a clip on it, it can't be mum.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, yeah, that's why I've seen it many times. And then you end up with a heart rate that is now, well, it's 95, and everybody's now rushing around. Okay, hang on, guys. This is the same heart rate. It's just gone down by 5, 10 beats. And the reality is you scan and there is actually no fetal activity at all.
So you need to get it done with that.
Which is why you need to get it with something that is certain, that is action, that there's no question. The guidelines always talk about you either put a scanner on or you use a pinard. Okay? How
Then
many
you
times?
should listen to the FH abdominally before you put stuff.
So you definitely should listen to the FH abdominally, but the normal CTG machine can pick up mom's heartbeat and show it as a CTG. Yeah, and we've all seen that. We've all seen that many times. Okay, but that's why we should. The national guidelines and our guidelines actually say you need to be certain that this is baby, and the way you can do that is by you can feel mom's pulse and hear something completely different. So that's one way. Okay, but if you really want to trust it, then you need to be either scanning so you can see baby's heart beating, or use a pinard. Why a pinard? But the pinard can. So what's the difference between a pinard and a sonic aid?
It's called picking up, Mum.
You can't pick up mom with a pinard? Okay. No, you can't. No, you can't. No, you can't. So the pinard is literally listening to the fetal heart sound. Okay? So you can't pick up, so whatever vessels in there, they are not going to be, so the pulsations of the vessels does not pick up the pinard. You can't pick up mom. So the pinard, if you can hear the baby with a pinard, you can hear the baby. Okay? But obviously it has its learning curve. Yeah. Practice in the middle of the desert.
You can hear it. It's the best.
I can hear it from far away. Just do it like that. I can hear the entire room's hot. So now the stand machine also shows the ECG signal, and it's important to always make sure that there's a P wave on the stand. The P wave is the atrial depolarization. Yeah, and usually mom's P wave is not strong enough to pass through, but the rest of the signal can. So if you can't see a P wave, this may be maternal. Once again, I have seen maternal with P waves. I mean, the P wave is not, if you look at the trace here, P wave is not huge, is it? Okay. So from none to a tiny blip there, it's always helpful to make sure that there's a different heart rate. Okay, really, really important. What is Stan looking at? We said that Stan has no standard. There's nothing that is recorded on Stan except for, it's looking for a QRS complex. That's how it counts the heart rate. And it looks for a T wave, and the T wave has to be looking up. That is the only things that are recorded in Stan. Okay, so Stan is now trying to compare. If it's trying to compare, it has to take something as a baseline. Yes? Something that's not going to change. So what it does is it takes the height of the QRS, because that's fairly stable, that's not going to change. Okay? The amount of muscle that's depolarizing, that's not going to change. Okay? And then compares it to the height of the T wave. And every 30 beats, it compares this to that height. What it's looking for is to see whether this T wave is becoming more, it's becoming taller, which is the rise in the TQRS ratio. Okay? And that is triggered by that potassium. So if you have more and more potassium, this triggers a change in the shape, making it taller, hence the ratio goes up. Okay.
Was that one?
Now, the other thing I said is it looks at the shape of the T wave because that is programmed. And that's what the numbers underneath mean. So there are three different shapes. One is you have a bi plus T wave, or you have one that actually, so in the middle it goes beneath the ST level, okay? Or it's actually starting from beneath and then goes up. What does that mean? So, but that's the change in shape tells you that the hypoxia was so significant that the sodium potassium pump in this peak had no time to have no energy to push the potassium in and sodium out. That's how low things had become. Okay, this is something that's usually happening quite acutely. Okay, now the problem with shapes is that other things can trigger the change in shape. We saw a baby recently that had a funny looking ECG. And then the machine started alarming, okay, biphasic event. That's what it calls a biphasic. It looks like it's a biphasic T wave. Okay? Check, first thing it asks you to check the baby's lying in the right direction so that you don't have a click on the bottom. Because if it's on the bottom, the T wave is going to be looking downwards. Okay? The other thing is, if it's not on the bottom, then, okay, this baby is going through something. The other thing about biphasics is that it can happen with just some fetal activity. If baby is becoming very active, it can become very active so much so that a couple of beats miss the energy enough for the sodium potassium pump. It doesn't mean that this baby is unhappy or unwell. Okay? But that's assuming that everything else is normal. Remember, we start off by assessing the CTG. If there is say that again. Yes. But rate-related ischemia in adults is different. Rate-related ischemia, you don't have enough time to pump through the coronaries. So the heart is becoming ischemic because it doesn't have enough filling, enough blood coming out. Okay. What?
So carry on and then
so if there is an ST event, then it gives you a black box and it goes on the side, say you've had a ST event, which is this description. Okay. There are three types of ST events that we're going to be talking about. Now, STAN is based upon the old FEBO guidelines. I know that you're all aware that we are trying to change guidelines and we've come up with a modified guideline that we were testing, that you guys were actually testing in our last study. The idea is that the old guidelines were based upon pattern recognition. You had to classify the CTG according to whatever degree. And then you go and look at what the STAN event was. So in the last picture, it was an episodic rise. So this one of, let me go back, of 0.15. Okay, so if we look at this trace, according to the classification, you have a high baseline, you have recurrent atypical variables at the time in the past. So you had a baseline that was raised, okay, and you had variability was normal, but you had uncomplicated decelerations less than 60. Actually, you had complicated variables because they were biphasics. Yeah, so this was an abnormal trace. So we go here and we say, well, okay, it was an episodic rise of 0.15. So had the trace been intermediary, it wouldn't have triggered. It would not have been a significant event. But because it's an abnormal trace, it's a significant event. And what does that mean? That means that this baby's heart is becoming ischemic. I need to intervene and make this baby happier now. That doesn't mean I have to deliver now. It means I have to make this baby happier immediately. How long do I have? Standard guidelines say about 20 minutes. So if you don't intervene and make this baby happier within the 20 minutes, this baby is going to start becoming damaged. Does that make sense? This was the guideline that we used. Okay. So let's move on, and then we're going to step back a bit again to recap. So prerequisites. What do we need? Who can I use this test upon? It sounds like a very good test. It sounds like a clever test. Okay. Who can I use it on? It's not being tested less than 36 weeks. So this baby has to be 36 weeks or over. Yeah? Okay. I'm putting an FSC on. I can't put an FSC on, or there's a contraindication for an FSC, then I can't use this test. Okay. It has to be initiated when baby has a 4 minutes at least time for the machine to establish the baseline, when there's nothing happening. So I can't do it when there's precipitate labor and baby is literally progressing from 0 to 100 in 60 seconds. Yeah, that can't work. Okay. Or if she's in the second stage and she's starting to push, because regardless of, cannot assume whatever this baby is telling me that this baby is going to be absolutely fine with hypoxia all through and the pressure and the pushing and everything. Does that make sense? Okay. It can't be initiated if the baby has already suspected hypoxia. So if the baby has chronic hypoxia, or if this baby has other things going on, like chorioamnitis, because the etiology of this changes. And remember, chorioamnitis is an entirely different pathway. SAN is not looking for chorioamnitis. It will not recognize it. But if you think that there's already hypoxia, you can't start the trace because it's gonna compare the baby to a hypoxic state, which means that it's only gonna wait until the baby to die before it tells you that it's alarming. Okay. But what if I start it on an abnormal trace and then it starts alarming? Is that, so should I just ignore it? Or should I actually take it more seriously?
More seriously, because it means it's got worse.
Potentially more seriously. Yes. So if the baby improves, it's not going to take that into account. Okay. So if you started on a bad trace, it then became better, and then worse again, it's not going to reset itself to the better state. Okay. So you have to start at normal point. If you start at a bad state, it will only alarm when it's really, really, really bad. How much really, really, really bad can the baby take? You have no idea. Okay, so it has to be normal. What does normal mean, or no hypoxia means? Stable baseline, maintain virility. Okay, doesn't mean that there's no decelerations. Babies can have decelerations. That's a normal response as long as it's not hypoxic. And we also said it as long as there's no adrenaline, because there also means it's already started redistributing. Okay, and we had that over the weekend. We can't put it on a TENS machine. A TENS machine sends electrical impulses around, so you can't actually start on a TENS machine. In theory, you are monitoring the central changes. You are monitoring the baby's heart. So it should be very, very, very specific. You're comparing this baby to itself, so very specific to this baby, okay? And you should need to intervene much less, okay? Because even if you do see that the baby is going to sleep, or you need to show, I'm not entirely sure what's going on, all it needs is some fetal stimulation, which you can do with a scan. Yeah? Does that make sense?
Do you think this has happened?
I think it's a learning curve. I think we started, I think it set Kingston back a couple of years from what they had already achieved from the understanding of physiology, because we were moving back to a pattern recognition, which is what triggered the entire let's change the guideline. Okay. If the baby is normal, STAN can still give you some odd alarms, but it doesn't mean anything. If the baby is going along the hypoxia pathway, that's when STAN is helpful. Okay? You can, once you've deemed that you can trust STAN, if you see STAN alarming repeatedly, go back to your initial point, make sure, okay, yes, I could trust STAN at the time. Are there any physiological changes on the trace that can explain what's going on other than hypoxia, or is the trace actually telling me hypoxia? The problem happens when people start saying, well, STAN's happy, so I'm happy. STAN's happy, so I'm happy means that you actually don't understand what necessarily is going on, because you may end up with subacute hypoxia that is happening so fast, or acute hypoxia is happening so fast that STAN has no time to actually alarm. STAN is going to wait for at least 4 minutes of change, this T-QRS ratio, before it actually gives you an alarm. So if you've gone into acute hypoxia, it's not going to give you anything. And if you start on an abnormal trace to start with, good luck with that. Now, for STAN to work properly, it has to have good contact, okay? So we said if you're already on a hypoxic trace, it's not going to work. There's intracranial infection, fetal tachycardia, theoretically, the T wave and the P waves can actually start coming on top of each other, and then STAN is not going to be working well. Okay, you can record them to an ECG, and if there's fetal cardiac anomalies, you can't assess them. I would just say, for STAN to work, you need STAN to be in contact most of the time. Okay. The problem is STAN is monitoring the heart. But what if STAN is not monitoring the heart properly? The machine is not monitoring the heart properly. If there's big gaps, changes can happen within those gaps when you're not paying attention. Okay? So if you're seeing that your trace has gaps that are lasting for more than 4 minutes at a time, okay, well, you're not monitoring. You're only monitoring for a glimpse, and then half an hour later, another glimpse. Damage can happen within that, and you're just relying now that STAN is happening. Okay? If the trace has been normal, fine, adjust the tape and carry on. If the trace is not normal, and it looks like, okay, it's becoming hypoxic, but STAN is not alarming, and it's losing contact, you can't trust the STAN reassurance. Okay?
So then, because the traces become not normal, you can't use STAN.
You can't rely on STAN for reassurance. Remember, STAN is your reassurance. STAN is setting you the wall that you should not go beyond. Okay, we've recognized the changes by physiology. We've seen the changes, but we're pushing this baby a little bit further because we're getting somewhere, or we're just about to reach that point. Okay, we can't make this baby happier. Okay, and we've reached a point where either, well, she needs to have some contractions. Okay, there's decelerations. Can I push this baby just a little bit further to get there? It's off. If you can't, that's where STAN comes in. Yeah, it just gives you the reassurance that you're just pushing this baby a little bit, yeah. or reminds you that maybe you've not been paying attention and you're just pushing this baby a little bit too far. So if it's not attached properly, it can't reassure you.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You know when you say the numbers at the bottom,
yeah,
they often are there. What should you do?
okay.
It means that something.
If they are significant, if the change is significant, so 1 means it's heading towards the 1 shape, 2 is heading towards the 2 shape. Not significant enough for it to actually alarm. Yeah. If it is significant, it will alarm. It will tell you it's biphasic.
It means probably the baby's like giggling and whatever.
Yeah.
And why do you get loads in choreo?
I do not know.
They always come.
Remember, choreo hasn't. There's a different mechanism working. The permeability of the membranes is not the same. Okay? So electrolytes are leaking left, right, and center. You end up with the pump trying hard to push in this way, but it's leaking from the other side. And then the electrical impulse, which is overall of all of this, is just squiggly rather than